Huck vs Mairis Briedis. Not the fight I was hoping it to be. I'm usually someone who views myself as a fairly positive boxing fan, but I'm going to do two separate videos on tonight's boxing, Huck v Briedis and Akinlade versus Gorman. And I've got to say, it wasn't a vintage night of boxing tonight, unfortunately. Briedis impressed me in the fight, don't get me wrong, I'll come on to that in a second. But it wasn't the most entertaining of matchups. The fight never really caught fire. Largely, I think the reason for that is because Huck underperformed, and to be honest, he underperformed to such an extent it's got me wondering whether Huck is a shot fighter coming to the end of his career. Huck's only 32 years old, but you know, it's amazing to think he's only 32 given how long he's been, you know, operating at world title level within the Cruiserweight division. He's been in a lot of tough fights over the years, and I guess he's got that kind of style, that all-action, brawler-mauler style, that the fights can really age you, and you know, each fight, each war takes something more out of you, and perhaps that showed tonight. Huck, for me, looked like a guy who struggled to find his range. Huck, for me, looked like a guy who struggled to pull the trigger. He looked like a guy who was punching very wide. And to be honest, he looked like a guy who was sort of out of ideas. He looked like a guy who, you know, really had no variation and no plan B. And for me, he was relatively easily outworked, actually, and relatively easily outclassed by Mairis Briedis, who was taking a big step up tonight. Now, I've looked at Briedis before, and I think potentially I was guilty of underestimating him into this fight. Briedis is not the fast-footed outside boxer who throws fast, flashy combinations from range. He's not a tall, rangy guy. Yeah, he's not an elite slickster, if you like. And all of those things are probably things you associate with good classic boxers. But what Briedis does is actually box very soundly for a sort of stockier guy. He's got pretty good fundamentals. He doesn't have fast feet, you know, he's not throwing massive lateral movement around the ring, but he makes very good subtle adjustments, good angles with his feet. As a result, he can step into range and step out of range fairly nicely. Again, he's not got the longest jab, he's not got like this sort of amazingly rangy jab that, you know, it's a great rangefinder, but what he does is he works with it nicely for a sort of jab, and he kind of brings it through the centre nicely and almost kind of uses it as a ramrod jab to kind of push his opponent back with. And yeah, he's accurate, he's relatively tight defensively, and he's got decent shot selection, and you know, his fundamentals tonight really had the beating of Huck by quite some margin. Realistically, I wouldn't have any complaints if you chose to give 10 rounds, 11 rounds, maybe even 12 rounds of this fight to Mairis Briedis. And to be fair, the Germans have a bad reputation for their judging. The scorecards were relatively wide. I think one of the judges had it something like 10 rounds to Briedis. One of them had it 116, 111, which I thought was, you know, pretty close. But on the whole, you know, the judges had it a clear win for Mairis Briedis, which probably told the story of the fight in general. You know, Huck was very disappointing. And for me, you know, towards the last round, his trainer was really trying to rile him up. His trainer was screaming at him. The crowd were going mental. You know, Huck is a fan favourite out there. He's got huge support. But I wasn't 100% sure he wanted it in the 12th round. You know, he looked like a guy who'd been mentally broken. He didn't come out with a sort of fire in his belly looking to throw down for one last round. And I just wonder if maybe that's the last big night of Huck's career, unfortunately. And he's been a great servant to the game. He's been involved in a lot of good fights. But he was just very low volume tonight. And he just really struggled to establish himself in the fight and put his work out like he normally does, which is a real surprise, because Huck's the kind of fighter who you thought you'd get guaranteed fireworks from in a fight like this. But just seemed a bit out of ideas, seemed like he'd maybe lost a step. And I guess the nature of how he fights, you know, the nature of the style he brings to the ring means that, you know, Father Time is going to potentially catch up with him a lot quicker than a guy who's a real technician, like a Bernard Hopkins type character. So yeah, Briedis won. Briedis won very nicely. Briedis was involved in a fight tonight where his power wasn't enough. and he showed that he could fight for 12 rounds. He showed that he could stick to a game plan. He showed that he could stick to his fundamentals, and he, showed that whilst he may not be the flashiest outside boxer, he's a very, very solid technician with good fundamentals, and he uses his physique very well in there. So I'm going to give Mairis Briedis a hell of a lot of credit. I'd take Alexander Usyk out of the equation because for me he's the standout fighter in that division. But below Usyk, you've got guys like Glowacki, you've got guys like Briedis, you've got guys like Gassiev. You maybe would want to throw in Tony Bellew if he were to step down to Cruiserweight. For me, out of those names, Briedis would have a claim to being right at the very top of that list, just one place behind Usyk. I think if he did step into the ring with Usyk, he probably would get found out, because I suspect that Briedis would be vulnerable to a guy with very, very fast feet who use lateral movement and who look to box more from the outside. Funnily enough, if you actually look back at that Simon Vallily fight, Vallily actually had more success for me in that fight than Marco Huck did, which is a bizarre thing. But styles make fights, and that kind of rangier, bigger opponent who's going to be able to have a size and range advantage against Briedis and box from distance and show him a bit of movement is the kind of guy I think could give him a bit of trouble, because Briedis has got very, very good fundamentals, but he isn't the fastest on his feet. He's got decent hand speed, but he's not the fastest on his feet. He's not the rangiest. He's not got like the most electric range of punches from, in terms of straight punches from the outside. He's not going to be able to stand off and jab cross from range. He's more of a guy who's looking to throw overhand punches, looking to throw an uppercut, looking to close the distance. But yeah, credit to Briedis. I thought it was going to be a much more competitive fight than it was. Completely fair shout. A word on the commentary. I did have a few tweets with my good friend and YouTube colleague Ultratech Sports during the night. I thought it was quite bizarre commentary from Barry Jones. Several rounds he seemed to give to Marco Huck, which for me were clear Briedis rounds. Rounds that I thought were Briedis rounds quite easily. Barry Jones seemed to be scoring to Marco Huck. And I noticed, I took a few breaks during this fight. I needed to make a cup of tea and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, maybe I missed it. But I was unaware of the Box Nation commentators scoring the fight at any time. As in, actually giving a live scorecard. At the end of the fight, they were saying things like a clear win, but they weren't saying 120-108 or 116-112. And I just wonder, it just seemed a bit bizarre. Usually you have a scorecard on the screen. Maybe they showed that and I missed it, I don't know. But it really did seem odd, because the way Barry Jones was scoring this fight, there were times I was wondering, does he have Huck as a live body in this fight? Is Huck, does he still have Huck in this fight? Whereas for me, as I say, Briedis was leading by by a good way. Now, I didn't watch the rest of the production. I didn't watch the undercard because I was actually watching the Nathan Gorman versus Dominic Akinladi fight, which was streamed live on Facebook, which I'll cover in a separate video in probably immediately after this one goes up. So I can't comment on the rest of the bill, and I can't comment on the general production and general commentary throughout the course of the night. But yeah, I didn't think it was Barry Jones's best night. I really thought Briedis won this fight, pretty much every round, if I'm honest. And Barry Jones, I can think of at least 3 occasions where he either scored the round level or scored the round in Huck's favour, and I couldn't really make out what was going on there. So yeah, I don't know if he was influenced by the crowd or he was trying to get his scorecard to line up more with the judges' scorecard, having the perception that the German judges would speak in favour of Marco Huck. But I found that a little bit odd. But yeah, there you go, guys. Let's see what happens next. Glowacki versus Briedis is certainly a fight I'd watch. Briedis versus Usyk, although I'd favour Usyk, is certainly a fight I'd watch, and possibly involves the number 1 and number 2 in the division. I guess the other thing to mention is lots of rumours that the Cruiserweight division will be part of the new Super Series tournament the Sauerland brothers are launching with the huge money pot at the end of it. So potentially a guy like Briedis could make big waves in a tournament like that. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Drop me your comments on the fight. How did you score it? What did you make of the commentary? Who would you like to see Briedis in next? How highly do you rate Briedis? And do you think Michael Huck, unfortunately, has come to the end of his career? If you've enjoyed this video, please take the time to click the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel or you haven't done so before, I would really appreciate it if you click subscribe. Many thanks indeed for tuning in, as always, guys.